The year was 1604, and a deathly silence had fallen over the opulent Hampton Court Palace, a silence so heavy it seemed to swallow the very whispers of the courtiers and the rustle of their fine silk clothes. For King James I of England, a man known for his sharp intellect and even sharper temper, was in a rage. His face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson as he glared at the group of stern Puritan clergymen who had dared to challenge the established church of his realm, a challenge he saw not as a religious debate but as a direct threat to his royal authority, and the leader of these Puritans, a man named Dr. John Reynolds, stood his ground with a calmness that seemed to infuriate the king even more, presenting a list of grievances against the Church of England until the king, unable to bear it any longer, exploded. "I will have one doctrine, one discipline, one religion in substance and in ceremony," and it seemed the meeting would end in disaster with the Puritans thrown into the dungeon. But then Reynolds, with a cleverness that would change history, made not a demand but a humble suggestion, a seemingly simple proposal to create a new translation of the Bible, one that would be so accurate and so majestic that it would unite all of England, a book for every man, woman, and child, from the highest lord to the lowest farmer, and the king's anger vanished, replaced instantly by a spark of fascination. For James was a scholar at heart, a man who loved a grand project, and he saw in this idea not just religious peace but a legacy, a Bible that would forever bear his name, and so he immediately agreed, commanding, "I approve of it, and will make it a public work. We will have a new Bible to end all arguments." And he ordered that the finest scholars from Cambridge, Oxford, and Westminster be assembled, divided into 6 companies, each given a portion of the Scriptures to translate, with strict rules to ensure its perfection, that it must be based on the original Hebrew and Greek texts, that the old ecclesiastical words like church be kept instead of the Puritan preference for congregation, and that the translation must have a musical rhythm, making it perfect for reading aloud in every church in the land. And as the scholars were summoned, each receiving the king's command with a mixture of honor and dread, for the task was monumental, to translate the very word of God, they could not know that this project, born from a king's fury and a priest's clever suggestion, would become a secret battleground, for ancient forces watched their work begin, and hidden within the dusty manuscripts and old languages they were tasked with translating was a powerful secret, a mystery so profound that some would kill to protect it, and others would die to uncover it, a truth that lay buried in every word they wrote, waiting for its moment to be revealed, a moment that began when the first scholar, in a quiet Oxford room, unrolled a fragile, ancient Greek scroll and dipped his quill in ink, unaware that a pair of eyes watched him from the shadows, eyes that did not belong to any man of God or king, eyes that held a chilling, ancient secret of their own, a secret tied directly to the creation of the world itself, a secret that was now, after centuries of silence, waiting to be found within the pages of the new Bible, a truth so dangerous it could shatter faiths and topple kingdoms. And the man in the shadow knew that the first word had to be stopped before it was even written, for if the translation was completed, the hidden message would be unleashed upon the world, changing everything forever. And so he stepped forward, his hand moving silently towards the scholar's back, a cold, sharp blade gleaming in the dim candlelight, poised to ensure that the king's great work would end before it could even truly begin, a fate that was only avoided because at that precise moment a loud crash echoed from the hallway, causing the scholar to jump and spin around, the would-be assassin melting back into the darkness, leaving behind only a single, ominous clue on the stone floor, a small, crudely fashioned clay medallion depicting a symbol none of the scholars could recognize, a twisted serpent coiled around a sliver of a crescent moon, a mark that would soon appear again, bringing with it a warning written in blood. A warning that the translation of the King James Bible would be anything but a peaceful scholarly pursuit, but a desperate race against a hidden enemy who knew the true power of the word, and who would do anything to keep it from being spoken, setting the stage for a conflict that would be fought in silent libraries and dark alleyways, a conflict that began with a single, unanswered question: what terrible truth was so dangerous that it was worth killing to keep hidden within the ancient texts? And why were these shadowy figures so determined that this new Bible must never be finished? A question that would haunt the lead translator, Dr. Lancelot Andrews, as he picked up the strange medallion, his blood running cold not from fear of the assassin, but from the terrifying realization that he had seen this exact symbol before, etched into the margin of a forbidden manuscript locked deep beneath the Vatican's vaults, a manuscript he had been sworn to secrecy about. A manuscript that spoke of a verse so powerful it could unravel the very fabric of creation, a verse that was, according to the ancient text, deliberately mistranslated centuries ago and was now, by the king's direct order, to be translated correctly for the very first time within their new Bible, and he knew, with a sinking heart, that the killer would be back, and that the next time, he would not miss his target, unless Andrews could uncover the truth first, a truth that began with a single name. A name whispered in the darkest corners of theological study, a name that was the key to everything, the name that was not supposed to be in the Bible at all. The name that was not supposed to be in the Bible at all echoed in Dr. Lancelot Andrews's mind like a condemned man's final prayer, a name he had encountered only once, a decade prior, during a clandestine and deeply forbidden scholarly expedition into the sealed archives beneath the Vatican. A place of shadows and whispers where the air was thick with the dust of forgotten centuries and the weight of suppressed truths, a name he had seen meticulously, almost fearfully, scratched out in the margin of a heretical text known as the Liber de Intacto Verbo, the Book of the Untouched Word, a text so dangerous it was said the very parchment it was written on could corrode the faith of the strongest believer, a text that spoke of a primordial, hidden layer within the Scriptures, a layer of meaning deliberately obscured by early church fathers who feared its power, a power not divine, but something older, something raw and fundamental to the fabric of existence itself, a name that was the linchpin of this hidden knowledge, Astaroth, a name not of a demon as commonly understood in vulgar folklore, but of a principle, a force of chaotic creation and dissolution that existed before the concept of God and devil were ever conceived by mankind, a name that, according to that blasphemous manuscript, was originally present in a crucial verse in the book of Proverbs. A verse speaking of the wisdom present at the foundation of the world, a verse that the early translators, in their terror, had replaced with a safer, more palatable term, a deliberate mistranslation that had stood for over 1,000 years in all accepted versions of the Bible, a lie cemented into Holy Writ, and now, King James's own instructions, his demand for a return to the most original and pure sources, his command to translate according to the truth of the original, meant that Andrews and his company of scholars at Westminster were duty-bound to correct this ancient error, to reinstate the original, terrifying word into the new translation, to place the name Astaroth into the hands of every English-speaking Christian, to print it in glorious, undeniable black ink, and as Andrews stood there in the cold Oxford room, the strange clay medallion with its serpent and moon symbol burning a cold imprint into his palm, he understood with a clarity that froze his very soul that the assassin was not some Catholic zealot trying to sabotage a Protestant Bible, nor a Puritan fanatic, but an agent of something far older, a sentinel, a guardian of this ancient secret, a member of a hidden order dedicated to ensuring that this specific truth never saw the light of day, that the deliberate mistranslation remained forever, and that this new Bible, the King James Version, must be stopped at all costs, for its publication would be, in their eyes, not a spreading of the gospel, but an unlocking of a door that was never meant to be opened, a catastrophic event that would, according to their beliefs, unravel the ordered reality upheld by the established church and unleash a tide of primordial chaos upon the world, and the symbol on the medallion was their sigil, the mark of the custodians of the veil, a secret society rumored to have existed since the Council of Nicaea, operating from the shadows, influencing translations, burning manuscripts, and yes, killing scholars to maintain the theological equilibrium of Christendom, to keep humanity safely ignorant of the unsettling, raw truths that lay buried in the ancient past. The crash in the hallway that had saved his life had been caused by a young, wide-eyed scribe named Thomas, who had tripped over a loose stone while bringing a message Andrews now took with trembling hands, a summons from the king himself, demanding an immediate and private update on the progress of the translation, a meeting that now felt like a descent into the lion's den. For how could he tell the king that his glorious project was already a target for a mysterious enemy he could not name? How could he explain the medallion, the assassin, the heresy of Astaroth without sounding like a madman or, worse, a heretic himself? Bidding the frightened Oxford scholars to double their guard and speak of this incident to no one, Andrews departed for London, the medallion a heavy secret in his pocket, the weight of the world on his shoulders, every shadow on the road seeming to hold a hidden threat, every stranger's glance feeling like a concealed assessment, his mind racing over the specific verse in Proverbs, chapter 8. A beautiful passage where wisdom speaks as a person, describing being present with God before creation. A cornerstone of Christian theology, but the original Hebrew text, which he had studied until his eyes ached, was frustratingly ambiguous in one key phrase, a phrase that could be translated as, "I was there," but also, in a more ancient and contested interpretation, as, "It was there." A subtle shift from a person to a force, and the word used in a handful of the most archaic, pre-Masoretic scrolls was not a word for wisdom at all, but a proper name, a name that resonated with terrifying familiarity from the Vatican text, a name that would change the verse from, "The Lord possessed me in the beginning of his way, before his works of old," to something utterly different, something that spoke of a raw, pre-divine force being harnessed, or perhaps partnered with, at the moment of creation, a theological earthquake that would challenge the very core of Genesis. Upon his arrival at Whitehall Palace, he was ushered not into a grand audience chamber but into a small, private closet lined with books, where King James awaited him, not seated on a throne but hunched over a desk littered with maps of biblical lands and annotated Greek texts, his fingers stained with ink, looking every bit the scholar rather than the monarch, and he dismissed everyone else with a wave of his hand, fixing Andrews with an intense, piercing gaze that missed nothing. "Well, Dr. Andrews," the king began, his Scottish accent thick, "report to me. How does God's great work proceed? Do the scholars squabble? Do they work with diligence?" Andrews, choosing his words with the care of a man walking on a blade's edge, spoke of general progress, of challenges with ancient Greek idioms, of the noble efforts of the companies. But the king, impatient, cut him off. "Spare me the pleasantries, Lancelot. I hear whispers. I have ears everywhere. There was an incident at Oxford. An intrusion. Speak plainly. What threatens my Bible?" Forced into a corner, Andrews reluctantly produced the clay medallion, placing it on the desk between them, and spoke of the shadowy figure, the gleaming blade, the timely interruption, but he carefully omitted any mention of the Vatican manuscript or the name Astaroth, framing it only as an attack by unknown forces opposed to a new translation. King James picked up the medallion, turning it over in his long fingers, his expression unreadable, and for a long, terrifying moment, Andrews was certain he would be accused of fabrication or heresy. But then the king did something utterly unexpected. He sighed, a long, weary exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of ages, and from a drawer in his desk, he produced an identical medallion, its surface worn smooth with age. "I had hoped it was but a myth," the king whispered, his voice low and grave. "A story passed down in secret from monarch to monarch, a warning from the time of my ancestor, James III of Scotland. He was presented with this same symbol by a strange monk who appeared at Holyrood Palace, warning him of a hidden order that moves in the shadows of the church, an order that believes some truths are too dangerous for mankind, that faith requires a certain, managed ignorance. This monk claimed his order had worked for centuries to protect the scriptures from themselves, to sand down the rough edges of revelation. He said any attempt to create a truly pure, powerful translation would be met with extreme opposition. I dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man. It seems I was wrong." Andrews was stunned, his mind reeling. The king knew. He knew of the custodians of the veil. This changed everything. The project was not just a scholarly or religious endeavor. It was a direct challenge to a hidden power, a deliberate provocation. "Your Majesty," Andrews said, his voice barely a whisper, "if this is true, the danger is far greater than we imagined. They will not stop with one failed attempt. They will come again. They will target the companies, the manuscripts, the printing presses. They will do anything to prevent this translation from being completed, especially—" He trailed off, fearing to say more, but the king's sharp eyes saw his hesitation. "Especially what, doctor? What specific part of God's word do they fear so much?" And in that moment, standing before a king who shared his terrible secret, Lancelot Andrews made a fateful decision. He leaned forward, and in the hushed silence of the book-lined closet, he spoke the forbidden name. "Astaroth," he breathed. They fear we will correct an ancient error in the book of Proverbs and write a name that was never meant to be read again. He expected shock, denial, fury. Instead, King James's eyes lit up with an alarming, fervent fire, the fire of a scholar who has just been presented with the ultimate textual puzzle. A name? In Proverbs? Show me, he commanded, pulling a heavy, ancient Hebrew codex towards him. And as Andrews pointed to the controversial verse, explaining the linguistic nuances and the evidence from the oldest sources, the king followed along with rapt attention, his initial fear transforming into a fierce, determined obsession. "This is it, Lancelot!" he exclaimed, striking the desk with his fist. "This is the very heart of why we are doing this. We are not just making another Bible. We are uncovering the original, unvarnished truth of God's Word, no matter how unsettling it may be. This translation will be a weapon against centuries of deception. We must include it." He was exultant, seeing in this terrifying secret the ultimate validation of his project. But Andrews felt only a cold dread. The king's scholarly zeal was blinding him to the apocalyptic stakes. They were not just scholars. They were soldiers in a secret war they barely understood, about to fire a shot that would draw the full, furious attention of an enemy that moved like a ghost through history. As he left the palace, armed with the king's absolute command to proceed with the correct translation and his order to secretly increase security around all the scholars, Andrews felt more alone and terrified than ever before. The king saw a glorious crusade for truth, but Andrews could only see the shadowy figure with the blade, the cryptic symbol, and the chilling promise of more violence to come. He returned to his quarters at Westminster, his mind a storm of fear and duty, and as he entered his study he froze. The room was in disarray, books pulled from shelves, papers scattered across the floor. Someone had been there, searching for something. And on his desk, placed neatly in the center of the chaos, was another message, not written on paper, but carved with a knife into the wooden surface of his desk, a message that made his blood run cold and confirmed his worst fears. It was a single, stark sentence, a threat and a promise that let him know the custodians of the veil were always watching, and that his audience with the king had not been private at all, a message that read, "The word will never be written. The first scholar will die at dawn." And below it, freshly etched, was the name of the man who led the Cambridge Company working on the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Bible, a brilliant but arrogant young scholar named Dr. William Ford. And Andrews knew, with a horrifying certainty, that the custodians were not just making a threat, they were issuing a specific, unchangeable death sentence, and he had mere hours to stop it. To race against the coming dawn to save a man's life and prevent the king's great Bible from being baptized in blood before a single word of it had even been officially translated, launching him into a desperate, breathless chase through the sleeping, dangerous streets of London, a chase where every corner could conceal an assassin and every moment brought the dawn closer, a chase that would end not at Cambridge, but at the dark, flowing waters of the Thames, where a figure waited, holding a struggling man, ready to make good on their promise and silence the truth forever. The dark, flowing waters of the Thames churned like a pot of ink under a moonless sky, its surface slick with the refuse of the sleeping city and reflecting only the faint, ominous glow of a lone lantern on the distant London Bridge, and there, on a crumbling wooden wharf that jutted out into the blackness like a finger pointing towards oblivion, stood the silhouette of the assassin, a figure of absolute stillness amidst the lapping waves, holding the struggling, gagged form of Dr. William Ford. The brilliant but arrogant Cambridge scholar, whose frantic motions were pathetic against the implacable strength of his captor, a captor who was now slowly, methodically, binding the man's hands with a coarse rope, preparing him not for a simple drowning, but for a ritualistic offering to the dark river. A symbolic silencing meant to echo through the companies of translators as a warning of the fate that awaited all who sought to unveil the forbidden word, and Lancelot Andrews, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird, his lungs burning from his frantic sprint through the labyrinthine alleys of Southwark, skidded to a halt at the edge of the wharf, his mind racing, weaponless, outmatched, knowing he had only seconds to act before the scholar was consigned to the depths. And in that moment of sheer, paralyzing terror, a memory flashed before his eyes, not a memory of scripture, but of his childhood on the merchant ships of London, of his father's voice explaining the treacherous currents of the Thames, the hidden sandbars and the powerful, sucking pull of the water around the wharves at low tide, and an idea, desperate and insane, sparked in his mind. He did not charge forward. Instead, he dropped to his hands and knees, scrambling in the mud and filth of the bank, his fingers closing around a heavy, waterlogged piece of timber, a broken spar from some forgotten boat, and with a guttural cry that was torn from the depths of his soul, a cry not of anger but of defiant purpose, he hurled the timber not at the assassin, but high into the air, arcing it over the assassin's head to crash into the water with a tremendous splash directly behind him, a distraction crude but effective, exploiting the fundamental instinct of any predator to assess a new threat from an unexpected quarter, and in the split second the assassin's head turned towards the sound, his grip on the struggling Ford loosening infinitesimally. Andrews launched himself forward, not with the grace of a duelist but with the brute, desperate force of a man fighting for a life and a destiny. Colliding with both men in a tangled, chaotic mass of limbs and shocked grunts, sending all three of them stumbling towards the rotten edge of the wharf, the wood groaning in protest under the sudden impact. The world became a freezing, suffocating nightmare of black water and violent thrashing, the shock of the cold Thames stealing the breath from Andrews's lungs, the taste of salt and sewage filling his mouth, and he could feel the assassin, a creature of terrifying strength and purpose, already disentangling himself, a blade gleaming dimly below the water's surface, aiming not for Andrews but for the still-bound Ford. Determined to complete his mission even in this chaos, and Andrews, acting on pure instinct, kicked out wildly, his foot connecting with something solid, feeling a satisfying crunch even through the numbing water, and the assassin recoiled with a muffled curse, his own knife slipping from his grasp and disappearing into the murk. But the victory was fleeting, for the man's hands were now around Andrews's throat, pushing him down into the suffocating darkness, the pressure immense, the will behind it absolute. And spots of light began to dance before Andrews's eyes. His struggles growing weaker, the world narrowing to the burning need for air and the terrifying face of his killer, visible now in a shaft of faint light from the lantern on the bridge, a face not of demonic rage but of cold, professional determination, a face that was startlingly ordinary, the face of a man who could be a merchant, a clerk, a priest, a face that made the evil all the more terrifying in its banality. And just as consciousness began to slip away, as his hands fell limp from their futile attempt to pry the iron fingers from his neck, a miracle happened. The rope around Dr. Ford's wrists, loosened by the struggle in the water, finally gave way, and the Cambridge scholar, fueled by primal fear and a fierce intelligence that understood this was his only chance, did not try to flee, but instead lunged forward, his own hands closing around the assassin's head, and with a furious, twisting motion born of sheer desperation, he shoved the man's face beneath the water, holding him there with a strength he never knew he possessed, and the grip on Andrews's throat vanished. Gasping, choking, Andrews surged upwards, sucking in great, ragged gulses of the foul air, and he saw the assassin, now the one being held under, thrashing with diminishing strength, until finally, he went still, his body floating limp in the current, a dark shape being carried away by the relentless flow of the Thames, the river that had been meant to be his tool of execution becoming his own watery grave. For a long moment, the two scholars, shivering and gasping, clung to the slimy pilings of the wharf, saying nothing, the immensity of what had just happened, the violence, the death, hanging between them in the cold air, a shared trauma that forged a bond stronger than any oath of secrecy. Finally, Ford, his voice trembling not with arrogance now but with a profound, life-altering shock, whispered, "Why? In God's name, Andrews, why did that man want me dead? What have we stumbled into?" And there, treading water in the filthy darkness of the Thames, with the body of their would-be killer floating somewhere downstream, Lancelot Andrews knew the time for half-truths was over. He told him everything, the king's secret knowledge, the custodians of the veil, the clay medallion, the forbidden name Astaroth, and the terrifying truth about the verse and proverbs they were all tasked to translate. To his surprise, Ford, instead of recoiling in horror or dismissing it as madness, listened with an intense, scholarly focus, his mind, even in this extremity, categorizing and analyzing the information. When Andrews finished, Ford was silent for a moment, then said something that sent a new, different kind of chill down Andrews's spine. "Astaroth. I have seen that name," Ford whispered, his teeth chattering from the cold. Not in a Vatican text, but in something older. Much older. Before we were attacked, before any of this, my company in Cambridge was working on the book of Genesis, the very beginning, the creation. We were cross-referencing the most ancient Hebrew sources we could find, texts that predate the Masoretes by centuries, fragments that were almost dust. In one, a commentary so old the script was nearly faded away, there was a marginal note, a gloss on the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The note suggested that the word we translate as created, bara, in its most archaic form, could also imply a concept of fashioning from pre-existing chaos, or imposing order upon a primordial force. And the note named that force. It named it Astaroth. It claimed the verse held a hidden meaning, that it was not a creation from nothing, but a great ordering, a taming of a wild, pre-existing power that was neither good nor evil, but simply was. And the commentary warned that this power, though bound and harnessed in the act of creation, was never truly destroyed, only sleeping, woven into the fabric of the world, and that its name, if spoken with true intention and understanding, could stir it from its slumber. The implications were staggering, world-shattering. This was no longer just about a controversial translation or a hidden name in Proverbs. It was about the very first verse of the Bible. The custodians weren't just protecting a secret. They were guarding a sleeping giant. The King James Bible, in its quest for purity and accuracy, was threatening to become a key, an incantation that could, according to these ancient beliefs, awaken something unimaginable. The two men dragged themselves from the freezing water, their bodies numb but their minds ablaze with terrifying revelation, and knowing they could not return to their normal lodges or routines, for the custodians would surely have eyes everywhere, Andrews led them to the only place he knew might offer a semblance of safety and the tools to understand the enemy, the library of his friend and fellow translator, Dr. Richard Bancroft. The Archbishop of Canterbury, a man of immense power, deep learning, and a vaulted collection of rare texts that rivaled the king's own, a library that was, crucially, within the fortified walls of Lambeth Palace. Gaining entry in the dead of night, looking like two drowned, frantic rats, they managed to secure a private audience with the Archbishop, a tall, stern man with eyes that missed nothing, and they poured out their entire story, from the assassination attempt to the body in the Thames, from the king's secret knowledge to Ford's shocking discovery about Genesis. Bancroft listened in grim silence, his face a stony mask, but his eyes growing increasingly dark with each new revelation. When they were finished, he rose and walked to a great iron-bound chest in the corner of his study, unlocking it with a heavy key he wore around his neck. From within, he did not pull out a Bible or a theological treatise, but a sheaf of old, crackling letters and reports. "You have stumbled into a war that is older than the Reformation, older than the Church itself," Bancroft said, his voice low and grave. "The custodians of the veil are real. I have spent a lifetime tracking their influence, their manipulations. They were behind the loss of certain books from the Codex Sinaiticus. They pressured Jerome to make specific choices in his Vulgate translation. They have agents planted in monasteries, universities, and royal courts across Europe. Their purpose is not evil in the way we understand it. They believe, with a fanatical certainty, that they are saving humanity from a truth it cannot bear, from a power it cannot control. They believe the Bible is not just a book of salvation, but also a book of containment, and that certain truths, if widely known, would act as a crack in that container." He handed Andrews a letter, written in a cryptic cipher. "This was intercepted a week ago. It speaks of the English project and the unmaking word. It orders all available agents to converge on London. They are coming, Andrews. They are coming from Rome, from Madrid, from Paris. You have not stopped them. You have only made them more determined. The killing of one of their own will be seen as an act of open war." The scope of the conflict was now global. It was no longer a shadowy skirmish on the banks of the Thames. It was an international conspiracy descending upon England, intent on stopping the King James Bible at any cost. The three men, Andrews, Ford, and the Archbishop, stood in the silent library, the weight of this new knowledge pressing down on them. They were no longer just translators. They were generals in a secret war for the soul of Scripture, and their army was a scattered group of unsuspecting scholars. They had to warn the others, they had to protect the work, but how could they fight an enemy that was everywhere and nowhere, an enemy that knew their every move. It was Ford, the Cambridge scholar, whose mind, once arrogant but now sharpened by terror and revelation, who proposed a plan, a dangerous, brilliant, and utterly audacious plan. "We cannot just defend," he said, a new light in his eyes. "We must attack. We must use their own weapon against them. Their power lies in secrecy. We must expose them. We have the king's authority. We have the archbishop's resources. We must find their central node here in England, their headquarters. We must discover who leads them. And we must do it by using the very thing they fear most, the word itself. We will set a trap, using the translation of Proverbs as the bait. We will let it be leaked that we have definitively decided to use the name Astaroth in the new Bible, and we will wait for them to come to destroy the manuscript. And when they come, we will be waiting." It was a plan of breathtaking risk, a gamble that could get them all killed and see the precious translation destroyed, but it was also the only proactive move they had. Bancroft, after a long moment of contemplation, agreed. The bait would be prepared. The trap would be set within the seemingly vulnerable confines of Westminster School. But as they began to outline the details, a young, pale-faced acolyte rushed into the library, breathless, carrying a small, rolled-up scrap of vellum. "Your Grace," the boy stammered, bowing to the Archbishop. "This was just found. It was nailed to the great door of the palace chapel." Bancroft took it and unrolled it. It was a message, written in the same precise, cold hand as the threat carved into Andrews's desk. It contained no words of threat. Instead, it contained a single, devastating piece of information that proved the custodians were not only everywhere but were always 3 steps ahead. The message listed the names and locations of the 6 translating companies. It listed the specific verses each company was working on. And next to the name of Lancelot Andrews's own Westminster Company, next to the Book of Proverbs, someone had drawn a small, precise circle around a single, specific verse reference. Chapter 8, verse 22, the verse of Astaroth. And below the list, a final sentence was written, a sentence that showed they knew everything, even the secret meeting taking place at that very moment in Lambeth Palace. "The trap you are planning for us at Westminster has been noted. We will not be coming for the manuscript. We will be coming for the translator's daughter. Let us see how long his faith in an unmade word lasts when her screams fill the air." Andrews's blood turned to ice. He had a daughter, a bright, beautiful girl named Eleanor, who was staying with relatives in the seemingly safe, quiet countryside outside of London. A secret he had shared with no one outside his most trusted circle. The custodians knew. They knew his deepest vulnerability. And they were not interested in debates over translation anymore. They were going to wage war on his soul. The scholarly quest for truth had just become a deeply, horrifyingly personal nightmare, and Lancelot Andrews knew that to save his child, he might have to betray the king, the Bible, and the very truth he had sworn to uphold, setting him on a desperate, solitary path into the darkest heart of the conspiracy, where he would have to face an impossible choice between the life of his child and the fate of the world. The impossible choice. A barbed hook lodged deep in his soul, tore at Lancelot. Andrews, with a pain more acute than any physical wound, the threat against his daughter Eleanor, his bright, innocent child with her laughter that could light up the darkest cathedral, transforming him in an instant from a scholar general in a holy war into a single, terrified father, his mind reeling, his scholarly resolve crumbling into dust, because how could any truth, any divine word, any king's command, possibly be worth the life of his child? The cold, calculated cruelty of the custodians' message revealed their true nature. They were not lofty guardians of humanity's fragile peace but ruthless pragmatists who understood that the fastest way to break a man's faith was not to threaten his life, but to threaten his love, to target the sacred world he had built outside of Scripture, and they had found his weakest point, the center of his universe. And now they held a knife to it. The Archbishop and Dr. Ford stared at him, their faces pale with a mixture of horror and helpless pity, their grand plan of a trap at Westminster now rendered obsolete and foolish, a child's game in the face of this brutal, personal warfare. "They know," Andrews whispered, the words ash in his mouth. "They know about Eleanor." "How?" "I have told no one. She is hidden away, safe." But even as he said it, a terrifying realization dawned on him. The custodians didn't need spies in the church or the court. They had something far more pervasive. They had the undying loyalty of the common people, those who lived in superstitious fear of the old ways, the innkeepers, the farmers, the midwives, the countless invisible eyes and ears of the English countryside who would not see themselves as conspirators but as protectors of the natural order, reporting any strange occurrence or new face to their local priest, who might, in turn, be an unwitting agent of the veil. His daughter was not safe. She was a beacon in the dark, and the wolves were already circling. Bancroft, to his credit, moved from scholar to commander instantly. "We must ride. Now. We will take my personal guard. We will surround the house, extract the girl, and bring her here to Lambeth, where the walls are high and the loyalty absolute." But Andrews was already shaking his head, a terrible, bleak clarity descending upon him. "No, Your Grace. If we ride out with armed men, if we lay siege to the house to save her, they will know we received their message. They will know their threat has worked. And they will kill her immediately to prove their point, to show me that my defiance has consequences. Their agents are already there, watching the house, waiting for a sign. Our action will be her death sentence." He paced the room, his wet clothes leaving dark patches on the rich rug, his mind, usually so precise and logical, churning with panic and despair. He was trapped in a perfect snare. To act was to kill her. To not act was to leave her in their grasp. The message had not been a declaration of intent. It had been the first move in a game of psychological torture, designed to paralyze him, to make him their puppet. They wanted him to choose to sabotage the translation himself, to convince the king to abandon the project, to become their agent from within, and they were using his daughter's life as the currency for his betrayal. The weight of it was crushing him. He saw the verse in Proverbs, the name Astaroth, not as a word of divine truth anymore, but as a cursed thing, a thing of blood and loss, and he understood why the custodians fought so fiercely to keep it buried, not because it would awaken some primordial force, but because the pursuit of it cost too much. It demanded a sacrifice no father should ever have to make. He looked at the concerned faces of Bancroft and Ford, good men caught in this same terrible web, and he knew what he had to do. He had to play their game. He had to seem broken. He had to become the traitor they wanted him to be. "Leave me," he said, his voice hollow, defeated. "Please. I need to pray. I need to be alone with this." Bancroft looked skeptical, but Ford, perhaps seeing the utter devastation in Andrews's eyes, nodded gently and led the Archbishop from the library, closing the great oak door behind them with a The moment he was alone, the facade of defeat crumbled, replaced by a cold, focused fury. Prayer would not save his daughter. Action would. But it had to be his action, alone, secret, and utterly deniable. He went to the Archbishop's desk, found a quill and a single small sheet of vellum, and he began to write, not a prayer, but a message. But it was not a message to God, or to the king, or to his fellow translators. It was a message to the enemy. He wrote in a simple, clear hand, offering them the one thing he knew they wanted above all else, his capitulation. He proposed a trade. His daughter's life, unharmed, for the definitive assurance that the name Astaroth would never appear in the new Bible. He would personally oversee the mistranslation of Proverbs 8 verse 22, he would bury the truth himself, he would become the custodian within the Westminster Company, ensuring their work was sanitized, all in exchange for Eleanor's safe return. He stated that the exchange of proof must happen immediately, that very night. He would go to the one place in London known for its anonymity and its connection to all things hidden, the sprawling, chaotic, and dangerously apolitical marketplace of Southwark, specifically the inn known as the Tabard, a place where pilgrims, thieves, merchants, and spies mingled without question. He would be there in 1 hour. He would be alone. He would be unarmed. He would wait in a specific shadowed alcove near the stables. If they agreed to the trade, a single agent was to come and place Eleanor's favorite hair ribbon, a blue silk one he described in minute detail, on the bench next to him. This would be the sign that they accepted his terms and that she was alive and well. The ribbon would be the proof of life. Upon receiving it, he would begin his work as their saboteur. It was a desperate, incredibly dangerous gambit. He was walking into the lion's den alone, offering himself up as a sacrificial lamb in the hope of catching a glimpse of the lion's face. He wasn't trying to fight them, he was trying to identify them. If he could see just one agent, memorize his face, his mannerisms, anything, it would be a thread he could pull on later, a first step towards unraveling the entire conspiracy, and saving his daughter for real, not just through a damned pact with these demons. He sealed the note with a drop of wax, using his own signet ring, and then, moving like a ghost through the silent corridors of Lambeth Palace, he found the young, pale acolyte who had brought the original threat. Pressing a gold coin into the boy's hand, he instructed him to take the message to the same chapel door where the threat had been found and to nail it there, then to run away and speak of it to no one. The boy, wide-eyed but obedient, scurried off into the night. Andrews then returned to the library, wrote a brief, cryptic note for Bancroft explaining his necessary disappearance and begging him to trust and not to follow, and then he slipped out of a side entrance, melting into the pre-dawn darkness of London, a city of shadows that now felt like it was made entirely of eyes watching him. The walk to Southwark was a nightmare of heightened senses, every cough from a darkened doorway, every scuttle of a rat in an alley, every distant shout feeling like a prelude to an attack, but none came. They were waiting for him at the rendezvous point. The Taberton was still and silent, its usual raucous energy subdued in the dead hours of the night. The only sounds the snuffling of horses in the stables and the low groan of the inn signs swinging in the wind. His heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, Andrews took his position in the designated alcove, shrouded in darkness, his eyes straining to see any movement in the oppressive blackness. He waited for what felt like an eternity, each second stretching into an agony of anticipation, his mind torturing him with images of Eleanor, frightened and alone, and he questioned every decision that had led him to this moment, this desperate, foolish plan. And then, a figure emerged from the shadows on the far side of the stable yard. It was not a hulking brute or a sinister assassin, but a woman, dressed in the simple, grey woolen robes of a nun, her face hidden in the deep hood of her habit, her movements silent and graceful. She glided across the yard, a spectre in the night, and stopped before the bench in his alcove. She did not look at him, did not acknowledge his presence in any way. From within the folds of her robe, she produced a small object and laid it gently on the weathered wood of the bench. It was a ribbon. A blue silk ribbon. Eleanor's ribbon. A sob caught in Andrews's throat, a mixture of relief and horror. Relief that she was alive, horror that his plan had worked, that he was now truly in their thrall. The nun began to turn away, her task complete, and in that moment, a sudden gust of wind caught the edge of her hood, pulling it back for just a fraction of a second, and the faint light from a high window illuminated her face. And Lancelot Andrews felt the world drop out from beneath him. He knew her. It was Sister Beatrice, a quiet, devout, and seemingly gentle nun who worked in the kitchens at Westminster School, who served the scholars their meals, who was always there with a kind word and a warm bowl of stew, a woman who had listened to their debates and their discussions for months, a woman everyone trusted, a woman who was invisible. She was their eyes and ears inside the very heart of the translation project. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it, the perfection of the placement, left him stunned. As she disappeared back into the shadows as silently as she had come, leaving the ribbon lying on the bench like a snake coiled in the grass, Andrews remained frozen, not with fear now, but with a cold, calculating fury. He had his thread. He had a face. He had a name. He now knew the identity of at least one of the custodians. But as he reached out a trembling hand to pick up the ribbon, the symbol of his daughter's captivity and his own forced betrayal, he noticed something else lying on the bench, something the nun had placed beside the ribbon, something he had missed in his shock at recognizing her. It was a small, folded piece of parchment. With hands that shook, he unfolded it. It was not a message of reassurance or terms for their agreement. It was a single line, written in the same precise hand as all the others, a line that showed the custodians were not just ruthless, but that they enjoyed their games, that they were always in control. It was a line from the very verse they were fighting over, Proverbs 8 verse 22, but translated not into English, nor Latin, nor Greek, but into a strange, angular, ancient script that Andrews, with his vast linguistic knowledge, recognized immediately as a form of Paleo-Hebrew, the script used at the time of King Solomon himself. And below the line, the writer had provided a translation, a mocking, cruel translation that revealed the true depth of their knowledge and their malice. The line read, "The Lord possessed me, Astaroth, in the beginning of his way." And below it, the translation, "Your daughter is safe. For now. The next move is yours, Dr. Andrews." Translate this. They weren't just making a threat. They were mocking him, taunting him with the very knowledge he sought to suppress, showing him that they held not only his daughter but the true, original text itself, flaunting their power and his powerlessness. The ribbon was not just proof of life. It was a declaration of war, a challenge thrown down by a hidden enemy that knew every secret, controlled every piece on the board, and viewed his anguish as a form of entertainment. And as he stood there in the dark, clutching his daughter's ribbon and the devastating, mocking note, Lancelot Andrews made a silent vow, not to God, not to the king, but to himself. He would not be their puppet. He would not mistranslate the word. He would find his daughter. He would destroy the custodians of the veil. And he would do it by using the one weapon they thought they had taken from him, the unflinching, terrifying, and ultimately liberating power of the truth. He would give them their perfect, accurate translation. He would write the name Astaroth himself. And he would unleash whatever storm was coming, because the storm he would raise would be his own. Turning his back on the Tabardin, he walked back into the darkness, a changed man, no longer a defender of the faith, but an avenger, a father armed with a scholar's mind and a killer's resolve, ready to turn the custodian's own game against them, starting with the silent, unsuspecting nun in the kitchens of Westminster. Sister Beatrice moved through her morning duties with a serene efficiency that was a masterpiece of deception. Her hands kneading dough for the scholar's bread with a gentle rhythm that gave no hint of the cold calculation that lay beneath her humble guise, her eyes downcast in a show of piety that perfectly concealed the sharp intelligence constantly assessing every conversation, every dropped parchment, every worried glance between the translators who gathered for their morning meal, unaware that she herself was now the subject of a most intense and dangerous study. That the man she believed she had broken and turned into a puppet, Lancelot Andrews, was watching her from the shadowed archway of the refectory with the focused intensity of a predator, his father's heart still aching with the feel of his daughter's blue ribbon tucked against his chest, but his mind now clear, cold, and utterly resolved, having shed the paralyzing fear of the night before and replaced it with a strategic fury. Understanding that to defeat the custodians he had to think like them, to move like them, to become a ghost in their own machine, and it began with her, with this woman who was both a vulnerability in their armor and a potential gateway into their hidden world. He did not confront her. He did not accuse her. Instead, he began a campaign of subtle psychological pressure, a war of nerves designed to make her doubt her own security, to feel the gaze she was so accustomed to placing upon others. During the morning meal, he deliberately sat at a table directly in her line of sight, and instead of discussing the translation of Proverbs with his colleagues, he loudly debated the very specific and complex linguistic nuances of Paleo-Hebrew verb conjugations, dropping the term Astaroth not as a fearful secret, but as a dry, academic point of interest, watching from the corner of his eye as her hands, for just a second, stilled their work on a loaf of bread, the only sign that the word had struck its target. Later, he, accidentally, spilled a pot of ink near the kitchen entrance, and as she hurried to help him clean it, he engaged her in conversation, his tone friendly and casual, but his words carefully chosen. "Sister Beatrice," he said, wiping his inky fingers on a rag. "Your order, the Sisters of Silent Mercy, if I recall? Their mother house is in Northumberland, is it not? A cold, remote place for such devotion. I have always admired such isolation. It must make your work here in bustling London seem quite chaotic." He saw a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly masked, that he knew the name of her supposed order and its location, information he had spent the early hours before dawn extracting from a terrified and confused bishop's clerk, cross-referencing monastic records until he found the one that fit. Her cover was deep, but it was a cover nonetheless, and he was now picking at its edges. "We find God in all places, Dr. Andrews," she replied smoothly, her voice a soft, neutral tone, but he didn't miss the slight tightening around her eyes. "Even in chaos, there is order to be found. It was a perfect, innocuous response, but to Andrews, it sounded like a creed, a mantra of the custodians themselves. He smiled, a warm, genuine-looking smile that felt like a foreign muscle on his face. Indeed. Especially in chaos. He left her then, the ambiguous words hanging in the air between them, a seed of doubt planted. His next move was bolder, riskier. He knew he needed to turn her from an asset into a target, to make the custodians fear her as much as he needed to use her. Using a cipher he and Archbishop Bancroft had hastily devised years ago for sensitive church matters, he composed a short, encrypted message on a tiny scrap of vellum. The message was designed to be catastrophic if intercepted, reading, "Beatrice compromised. Westminster security known. Awaiting your new instructions." The word remains untouched. He did not sign it. He then performed a piece of theater worthy of the Globe itself. He waited until he saw Sister Beatrice carrying a basket of laundry towards the washing sheds, a chore that took her through a narrow, little-used cloister. As she passed, he stepped out as if deeply preoccupied with a heavy folio, colliding with her with a calculated clumsiness. The basket went flying, linen scattering across the stone floor. "Forgive me, sister! 1,000 pardons!" he exclaimed, flustered, helping her gather the sheets and shifts, and in the confusion of the moment, his hands a blur of feigned apology, he slipped the tiny, rolled-up vellum message deep into the sleeve of her own habit, a place she would not think to check. The message was not for her, it was for her masters. His hope was that the custodians, with their omnipresent surveillance, would have someone watching this exchange, would see the furtive-looking pass, and would subsequently search her, find the damning message, and believe that their trusted agent had been turned, that she was now a double agent feeding them false information. If they believed that, their response would be swift and brutal. They would either recall her for questioning, revealing their methods of extraction, or they would attempt to silence her permanently, an act that would require sending another agent, giving Andrews another thread to pull. It was a monstrous risk. He was gambling with her life, but the memory of the blue ribbon and the mocking note hardened his heart. She was the keeper of his daughter's location. She was a weapon, and he would use her. For the rest of the day, he played his part perfectly, immersing himself in the work of the Westminster Company with a feverish intensity that his colleagues attributed to divine inspiration, but which was in fact fueled by a desperate need for distraction and a cover for his true mission. He argued passionately for the most accurate, most literal translation of the contentious verses, becoming, in appearance, the very model of the king's commanded scholar, all while his every sense was attuned to the kitchen, waiting for the reaction to his gambit. The reaction came faster than he expected. As evening fell and the scholars retired to their studies, a young kitchen boy, his face smudged with soot, approached Andrews as he sat poring over a Greek lexicon. "A message for you, sir," the boy mumbled, holding out a grimy piece of paper. "From the nun. She said you'd give me a penny for it." Andrews's heart leapt into his throat. This was it. Either she had taken the bait, or she was calling his bluff. He handed the boy a coin and took the note. It was not in cipher. It was in a simple, clear hand, and it contained only 5 words. The Dovecot. 1 hour. Alone. The Dovecot. It was an old, disused structure on the far grounds of the Westminster estate, a crumbling stone tower where birds once nested, now forgotten by everyone. It was the perfect place for a secret meeting, or a perfect trap. This was the moment of decision. She had either discovered the message he planted and was acting under orders from her panicked masters to lure him into a vulnerable position, or his psychological warfare had worked, and she, feeling the pressure and the sudden suspicion from her own side, was attempting to make contact, to cut a side deal, to save herself. There was no way to know. Going there was an unimaginable risk. But not going was to lose his only lead, his only connection to Eleanor. The image of her face gave him courage. He would go. But he would not go unprepared. He retrieved 2 items from a locked chest in his room, a small, keenly sharpened dagger he had carried since his travels abroad, and a tiny, silver vial of a potent sleeping draught given to him by an Italian alchemist for bouts of insomnia. He would not go to kill, but to subdue and interrogate. If this was a trap, he would fight his way out. If it was a genuine offer, he would have the means to control the conversation. The walk to the dovecot in the deepening twilight was fraught with a tension that made the air itself feel thick and heavy. The old tower stood silhouetted against a bruised purple sky, its broken windows like blind eyes staring out at the gathering night. The door hung open on one hinge, creaking softly in the wind. Taking a final, steadying breath, Andrews stepped inside. The interior was dark, filled with the smell of damp stone and old straw. A single figure stood in the center of the circular room, her back to him, clad in the gray habit of Sister Beatrice. She turned slowly as he entered. Her face was pale, but her eyes were not those of a serene nun. They were sharp, afraid, and filled with a desperate resolve. "You play a dangerous game, Doctor," she said, her voice low, devoid of its earlier softness. "Your message was clumsy, almost insulting. Did you think we would not be watching? So it was a trap." Andrews's hand tightened on the dagger hidden in the sleeve of his robe. But then she continued, and her words took him completely by surprise. "They saw you plant it. They know what you are trying to do. And their response was not to doubt me, but to issue a new command. They have ordered me to kill you. Tonight. To make it look like a robbery. Your work on Proverbs has been deemed too great a risk to allow to continue." She took a step closer, and now Andrews saw that her hands were trembling. "I have been a custodian since I was a girl. Taken from an orphanage, raised to believe in the sacredness of the veil, to believe that we are the protectors of mankind's fragile peace. I have done things, terrible things, for that cause. But this, a child? Using a daughter to break a father? And now, the cold order to murder a good man in cold blood, not for what he has done, but for what he might do." She shook her head, a look of profound disillusionment on her face. "The message you faked, it showed me something. It showed me that you are fighting them. Truly fighting. Not just cowering. And it made me remember why I questioned them in the first place." This was not what he had expected. This was a fracture, a crack in the enemy's wall. He slowly relaxed his grip on the dagger, but kept his guard up. "Where is my daughter?" he asked, his voice hard. "She is safe," Beatrice said quickly. "She is being held at a safe house, not a prison. It is a place called the Old Mill, 2 miles east of St. Albans. The family that runs it are loyal custodians, but they are not cruel. They believe she is a noble's daughter being hidden from the plague. They will not harm her." It was the first piece of real, actionable information he had gotten. St. Albans. The Old Mill. It was a specific location. Hope, fierce and painful, flared in his chest. "Why are you telling me this?" he demanded. "Because I want out, Dr. Andrews," she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. "I have wanted out for a long time. But leaving the custodians is not like leaving a convent. It is a death sentence. They will hunt me to the ends of the earth. You offered me a way out in your clumsy message. I am now taking it. I will help you. I will help you get your daughter back. But in return, you must protect me. You must give me a new life, far from here, with enough money to disappear forever." She was offering him everything, the location, an insider's knowledge, a way to save Eleanor. But was it real? Or was this an even more elaborate layer of the trap, a way to lure him and his allies into an ambush at the old mill? He studied her face in the dim light, looking for any sign of deception. He saw only fear, exhaustion, and a glimmer of desperate hope. It was a reflection of his own soul. He made his decision. He would trust her. But he would verify. "The verse," he said suddenly. "Proverbs 8 verse 22. In the original Paleo Hebrew you so mockingly sent me. Recite it for me. Now." It was a test. If she was a low-level agent, she wouldn't know it. If she was truly high enough in their ranks to know the specifics of the threat, she would. Without hesitation, she recited the line, her pronunciation flawless, her understanding of the ancient cadence perfect. She was the real thing. A high-ranking custodian, now a defector. "We have a deal," Andrews said. "But we must move quickly. Tell me everything about the security at the old mill." "Everything." For the next hour, in the dank darkness of the dovecot, Sister Beatrice, the custodian of the veil, laid bare the secrets of her order. She described the number of guards, too, posing as mill workers, their patrol patterns, the layout of the mill, the room where Eleanor was kept, the passwords used by approaching agents. It was a treasure trove of intelligence. A plan began to form in Andrews's mind, a daring raid to extract his daughter. He would need Bancroft's men, but men who could be trusted absolutely, men with no connections to the church or the court who could be custodian agents. He would need to move with speed and precision. As they finalized the broad strokes of the plan, a new energy coursed through him. He was no longer just reacting, he was attacking. He had a target, a guide, and a hope. They agreed to meet back at the Dovecot at midnight to begin the operation. As she turned to leave, to return to the kitchen and avoid suspicion, Andrews felt a sudden, unexpected pang of something akin to pity. "Beatrice," he said. She paused. "The name. Astaroth, what do you believe it truly is? Why are they so afraid?" She looked back at him, and in her eyes, he saw not fanaticism, but a deep, genuine terror. "I believe the early church fathers were right to fear it, Doctor," she said softly. "I have seen texts, ancient texts that speak of it not as a demon, but as a key to a door that should never be opened. The custodians are not noble, but their fear is real. They believe your translation will not just inform people, it will activate something. It will be like speaking a spell that has been silent for millennia. They believe you are not writing a book, you are forging a weapon you do not understand." And with that, she slipped out into the night, leaving him alone in the darkness with a new kind of dread, the euphoria of the rescue plan now tempered by the chilling weight of her warning. He was not just saving his daughter, he was potentially setting in motion an apocalyptic event. But it was too late to turn back. He left the Dovecot, his mind racing with the details of the mill, the guards, the extraction, his heart daring to hope for the first time in days, already envisioning the moment he would hold Eleanor in his arms again, a moment that felt tantalizingly close, a moment that was, though he did not know it, already slipping from his grasp, for high in the rafters of the old Dovecot, hidden in the shadows where the birds once nested, a second figure had been listening to their entire conversation. A figure who had followed Sister Beatrice, a figure who now dropped silently to the ground after Andrews had left, his face a mask of cold betrayal, a figure who pulled a thin, sharp wire from his sleeve, the preferred tool of the custodians for silent, efficient killings, and moved swiftly and silently back towards Westminster Kitchen, to ensure that Sister Beatrice would never make it to their midnight rendezvous. To prove that no one ever truly leaves the Vale, and that Lancelot Andrews's hope was about to be strangled at its very source, turning his daring rescue plan into a funeral march before it had even begun. The figure moving swiftly and silently back towards the Westminster Kitchen was a man known only as Silas, a wraith in the service of the custodians of the Vale, a man whose entire existence was dedicated to the eradication of betrayal and the enforcement of absolute obedience. A living instrument of the Order's will who had been shadowing Sister Beatrice for days, not because they suspected her loyalty then, but because the attempted manipulation by Dr. Andrews had triggered their meticulous protocols for agent integrity, and he had witnessed the entire exchange in the Dovecot not as a participant but as a final auditor, his cold, dispassionate eyes recording her every word of defiance, her every piece of revealed intelligence, her every betrayal of the sacred cause. And his mission, once mere surveillance, had now crystallized into a single, clean, objective, permanent, and immediate silence. He found her in the scullery, alone, scrubbing a large cast-iron pot, her hands red and raw from the hot water and lye, perhaps seeking mundane normalcy in the familiar chore to calm her nerves before the perilous midnight operation, and she did not hear him enter, his footfalls on the stone floor as silent as a falling feather, and he gave her no moment of recognition, no chance for a final prayer or a gasp of surprise. The thin, deadly garrote wire, weighted at each end for perfect balance, was around her neck and pulled taut with a brutal, practiced efficiency in one fluid motion, cutting off all sound, all air, all life, her body convulsing against his with a strength that was shocking but brief, her hands still wet and soapy, clawing futilely at the wire, biting deep into her flesh, her eyes wide with a terror that quickly faded into a fixed, glassy stare, and he held her until all struggle ceased. until she was nothing but a dead weight in his arms, and then he lowered her body gently to the floor, not out of respect, but to avoid any noise that might attract attention, arranging her limbs to look like she had slipped and fallen, hitting her head on the edge of the stone sink, a plausible, tragic accident for a hard-working nun in a dimly lit kitchen. His work was not yet done. From a hidden pouch in his own dark robes, he produced a small, sharp stylus and a sliver of the same peculiar clay used for the medallions, and on the floor next to her outstretched hand, he quickly incised the now familiar symbol of the serpent and the crescent moon, pressing it into the faint dampness on the stone, leaving a subtle, terrifying signature that would be found by the right eyes. A message meant for one person and one person only, Lancelot Andrews. It was a statement, a taunt, and a warning all in one. It said, "We know. We are always here. Your ally is dead. Your hope is an illusion. We are watching your next move." Silas then melted back into the shadows from whence he came, leaving the body to be discovered by some sleepy kitchen hand at dawn, his mission a perfect, silent success, a chilling demonstration of the custodian's reach and ruthlessness. Meanwhile, Lancelot Andrews, burning with a newfound and fragile hope, was in the private chambers of Archbishop Bancroft, speaking in hushed, urgent tones, laying out the entire incredible story: the meeting in the dovecot, Beatrice's defection, the location of the old mill near St. Albans, the detailed layout, the guard patterns, and Bancroft, his face growing ever more grim and astonished with each revelation, listened without interruption, his strategic mind already assessing the risks and logistics of a military extraction. "We must act, and act tonight," Andrews insisted, his voice trembling with a mixture of excitement and fear. "She gave us everything. This is our only chance. We need men. Your most trusted guards. Men whose loyalty is beyond question." Bancroft nodded slowly, stroking his beard. "I have such men. A dozen of my personal retinue, veterans of the campaigns in Ireland, utterly loyal to me, not to the crown or the church, but to my person. They ask no questions and they are deadly efficient. They can be ready to ride within the hour. We will use my private barge to cross the Thames silently, then take horses from my estate in Lambeth. We can be at St. Albans by the second hour after midnight." The plan was set into motion with a terrifying speed and efficiency that spoke of Bancroft's power and resolve. The chosen guards, grim-faced men in unmarked leather jerkins, were assembled, armed with swords and daggers and heavy cudgels, their instructions clear: surround the mill, subdue any resistance, and extract the girl with minimal noise and absolute priority. Andrews, though no soldier, insisted on accompanying them, a decision Bancroft reluctantly agreed to, knowing the father's need to be there was a force unto itself. The journey was a silent, tense nightmare through the pitch-black English countryside, the only sounds the muffled hoofbeats of their horses, the creak of leather saddles, and the pounding of Andrews's own heart in his ears, his mind rehearsing the layout Beatrice had described. Visualizing the room where Eleanor slept, praying he was not leading them all into a meticulously laid ambush. As they dismounted a quarter mile from the mill and approached on foot through dense woods, the place appeared exactly as described: a old, timber-framed building beside a sluggish stream, its water wheel still, the windows dark except for a single, soft glow on the upper floor. The room. The guards moved with a ghostly precision, fanning out to surround the building, two of them silently dispatching the two mill workers, who were standing watch outside with a swift, brutal efficiency that turned Andrews's stomach but also filled him with a savage hope. With the outside secure, the signal was given. The main door was breached with a single, powerful kick from a guard's boot, and the armed men poured into the main hall of the mill, Andrews right behind them, his eyes wild, searching for the stairs to the upper floor. But what they found inside was not a defensive stand or a panicked family. They found silence. The main room was empty. A single candle guttered on a table, casting long, dancing shadows. A pot of stew sat cold in the hearth. There was no sign of struggle, no sign of a hasty departure. It was as if the place had been abandoned hours ago. A cold dread, colder than the Thames water that had almost claimed him, began to seep into Andrews's bones. "Search the place, top to bottom," Bancroft's captain hissed, and the guards fanned out, their heavy footsteps echoing through the empty building. Andrews took the stairs two at a time, bursting into the small upper room that had held the soft light. It was a child's room. A small bed with a rough woolen blanket. A wooden doll sat propped on a pillow. And on the bedside table, next to a burned-down candle, was a book. A child's primer. And tucked neatly into its pages, like a bookmark, was another blue silk ribbon. Identical to the first. His daughter had been here. Recently. But she was gone. They had known. They had known everything. Beatrice's defection, their plans, their route, their timing, it had all been anticipated. The information she provided had been a gift, yes, but a poisoned one, leading them not to a rescue, but to a hollow, devastating echo. The custodians had been playing them all along, allowing the hope to build only to shatter it completely, demonstrating their absolute control over the game. One of the guards called from below, his voice tense. "Your Grace. Doctor. You need to see this." They descended to the main hall to find the guards standing around the large, cold hearth. One of them was pointing at the back of the fireplace, at the soot-blackened brick. Scratched into the soft mortar, fresh and unmistakable, was the symbol. The serpent. The crescent moon. And below it, a message was written not in ink, but in what looked like charcoal, a message that was the final, crushing blow. "We have moved the truth. You are always translating the past." The meaning was clear and horrifying. They weren't just steps ahead, they were in a different race entirely. They had taken Eleanor away from this location the moment Beatrice had been compromised, using the information she gave Andrews as a way to mock him, to show him that his attempts were futile. The message meant that by the time he acted on any information, it was already obsolete, that the truth of his daughter's location was a fleeting thing they controlled completely. Andrews sank to his knees on the cold stone floor of the mill, the blue ribbon clutched in his hand, not in triumph, but in utter, soul-crushing defeat. The hope that had flared so brightly in the dovecot was extinguished, replaced by a despair so profound it felt like a physical void opening inside him. He had been outmaneuvered at every turn. Bancroft placed a hand on his shoulder, his face ashen. "Lancelot, I am so sorry." But as they stood there in the devastating silence of the abandoned mill, a new sound reached them, the sound of hoofbeats, many of them, approaching fast from the direction of London. The guards immediately snapped into a defensive posture, swords drawn, forming a protective circle around the archbishop and the broken scholar. Had the custodians returned to finish them off? Were they now surrounded? The horses skidded to a halt outside, and a moment later the door was flung open not by enemy agents, but by a man in the distinct livery of the royal court, his face flushed from hard riding. He scanned the room filled with armed men and his eyes found Archbishop Bancroft. He dropped to one knee, bowing his head. "Your Grace. Thank God I found you. I have ridden from Whitehall with all speed." Bancroft stepped forward, his expression wary. "What is it? What has happened?" The messenger looked up, his eyes wide with a panic that had nothing to do with their secret war. "It's the king, Your Grace. King James has fallen violently ill. His physicians are baffled. He raves in his bed, crying out about serpents in the ink, about words burning his skin, about a name that must not be written. He calls for Dr. Andrews constantly, demanding his presence. He says the Bible is killing him." The message landed like a thunderclap in the silent mill. The king, the patron of the entire translation, the man whose command had started it all, was now under attack. The custodians were not just targeting translators and their families. They were targeting the throne itself. Their methods were not limited to knives and garrotes. They employed subtler, more sinister tools, perhaps poison, perhaps something else entirely. The war had just escalated beyond anything Andrews could have imagined. His personal tragedy was now enmeshed with the fate of the nation. The desperate rescue mission was over, ended in total failure. A new, more terrifying crisis had begun. Andrews slowly rose from his knees, the blue ribbon still clutched in his fist, but the despair in his eyes was now forged into a cold, hardened steel. The custodians had taken his daughter. Now they were taking his king. They were attacking the very foundation of his world. And as he looked at the royal messenger, then at the terrified face of Archbishop Bancroft, he knew what he had to do. He had to return to London, He had to go to the king's bedside. He had to face whatever madness was consuming the monarch. And he had to do it not as a grieving father, but as the only man who understood the nature of the enemy they were facing, an enemy that fought not with armies, but with secrets, with symbols, and with the terrifying, weaponized power of words themselves. The translation of the King James Bible was no longer a project, it was a battlefield, and the king's sickroom was its latest front. The king's sickroom, usually a place of opulent power and controlled order, had been transformed into a scene of guttering chaos, a stark contrast to the silent despair of the abandoned mill, for King James I. The scholar king who had commanded the pure word of God be brought forth for his people, now lay twisted in the sweat-soaked silks of his royal bed, his body convulsing with tremors that seemed to originate from deep within his bones, his eyes wide open but seeing nothing of the panicked physicians and terrified courtiers who crowded the room, instead staring into some horrific inner landscape where ink bubbled like tar and serpents of letters coiled around his throat, his voice, usually laden with authority and a thick Scottish brogue, now reduced to a raw, rasping shriek that tore through the hushed atmosphere of Whitehall Palace, crying out fragments of scripture and nightmare. The letters, they burn, they crawl on the page, cease the translation, break the pens, for the word was made flesh and it gnaws at my own. And then, his head lolling to the side, his bloodshot eyes fixing on a particular tapestry depicting the judgment of Solomon, he would whimper. The wisdom, the false wisdom, it wears a crown of thorns and a name of fire. Do not write it, I command you, strike it from the record, before descending into incoherent babble that sounded like the rasping of some ancient, forgotten tongue. Lancelot Andrews, still smelling of the night ride and the cold ashes of his failed hope, pushed his way through the crowd of useless physicians, his own heart a numb stone in his chest, the image of the empty mill and the second blue ribbon seared into his mind, but now overlaid with this new, royal catastrophe, understanding that the custodian's attack was multi-pronged, psychological, and diabolically brilliant. They had not just moved his daughter, they had attacked the very head of the snake, aiming to decapitate the translation project at its source by destroying the mind of the king himself. He approached the bedside, and as he did, the king's thrashing stilled for a moment, his wild eyes focusing on Andrews with a terrifying intensity, a skeletal hand shooting out from the covers to grasp Andrews's wrist with a feverish strength. You, the king hissed, spittle flecking his lips. You of the Westminster Company. You who look upon the face of the first word. You see it, do you not? The void behind the verse? The chaos grinning through the grammar? The king's grip was like iron, his eyes pleading and accusing all at once. Tell me you see it, Lancelot. Tell me I am not mad. It is the translation, is it not? It has awakened something, something that knows its name is being called and seeks to answer. Andrews, shaken to his core, could only nod, his voice failing him. The king's madness was not mere delirium. It was a distorted reflection of the very truth Andrews and Bancroft had uncovered, the terrifying possibility that the act of translation was not passive but active, an invocation. Your Majesty, Andrews managed to say, his voice low and steady, trying to project a calm he did not feel. You must rest. The work is in hand. The word is safe. But the king shook his head violently, a fresh wave of agony contorting his features. Safe? Nothing is safe. They are in the walls, Lancelot. In the inkwells. They showed me the true Genesis, not a creation, but a capitulation. A treaty with the elder chaos. He fell back, exhausted, his breath coming in ragged gasps, his words descending into a whisper meant only for Andrews's ear. The gift, the wine, from the new French ambassador, a cask, a congratulatory gift for the new Bible. It tasted of honey and ashes, it showed me the truth they hide. And then his eyes rolled back in his head, and he fell into a fitful, twitching unconsciousness. Andrews slowly pried the king's fingers from his wrist, his mind reeling. The wine. The French ambassador. It was not a supernatural affliction, it was poison. A sophisticated, mind-altering poison designed to induce horrific, thematic visions, to break the king's will and make him renounce his own project. The custodians had agents in the highest diplomatic circles. This was an act of international sabotage. He turned to Archbishop Bancroft, who stood pale and grim at the foot of the bed. "He's been poisoned," Andrews whispered, the words tasting like gall. "A neurotoxin of some kind, likely in the wine from the French ambassador. It induces waking nightmares tailored to his deepest fears." Bancroft's face hardened into a mask of grim resolve. "The French," he muttered. "Their Catholic League has long opposed an English Bible. This is their work, through the veil." He immediately began barking orders, dispatching his most trusted guards to secure the ambassador's quarters, to impound the remaining wine, to find the king's cupbearer. But Andrews knew it was too late. The evidence would be long gone, the ambassador pleading diplomatic immunity and utter ignorance. The custodians were masters of plausible deniability. As the physicians resumed their futile ministrations, Andrews noticed something on the bedside table, next to a basin of water and bloodletting tools. It was the king's personal notebook, a journal he often used to jot down scholarly thoughts and notes on the translation. It lay open, and the page was filled not with the king's usual precise hand, but with frantic, jagged, uncontrolled scrawls, the ink blotted and splattered as if the pen had been driven by convulsing fingers. Most of it was illegible madness, but one phrase, written over and over again in a desperate, looping script, caught Andrews's eye. "The gate is in the genealogy." It was surrounded by crude drawings of doors and swirling, chaotic patterns. The other courtiers and physicians saw only the ravings of a fevered mind, but Andrews, his perception sharpened by his own ordeal, saw a pattern, a message buried in the madness. The king, in his poisoned state, had been trying to communicate something he had seen, something the toxin had unlocked or revealed. "The gate is in the genealogy." It made no sense. The genealogies in the Bible, particularly in the Gospels, were often considered the most dry, tedious passages, lists of begots, that most readers skipped over. What gate could possibly be there? Was this merely nonsense? But then, a connection sparked in his mind, a memory of a conversation weeks ago with Dr. Ford, the Cambridge scholar. Ford had been working on the genealogy of Christ in the Gospel of Matthew, and he had complained jokingly about the tediousness of it. But he had also mentioned, in passing, a peculiar anomaly he'd found in one of the oldest Greek manuscripts he was using as a source, a manuscript so old it predated the Council of Nicaea. He said that in the list of names, one of them was spelled differently, not with the Greek letters he expected, but with characters that looked almost Phoenician, and that a later hand had scratched it out and written the correct name above it. At the time, Andrews had dismissed it as a simple scribal error. Now, with the king's ravings echoing in his head, it seemed vitally important. Could the custodian's concern extend beyond Proverbs and Genesis? Could there be another, unmaking word, hidden in plain sight, in the most boring part of the New Testament? Was that the gate the poisoned king was trying to point to? The king's life hung in the balance, his daughter was still missing, and now a new mystery was unfolding, one that suggested the conspiracy was even deeper and more complex than he had imagined. He needed to find Dr. Ford. He needed to see that ancient manuscript. Excusing himself from the sickroom, he rushed to find a messenger, to send word to Cambridge to summon Ford to London immediately. But as he descended the grand staircase of Whitehall, a different royal guardsman approached him, not one of Bancroft's men, but one of the king's own. "Dr. Andrews?" the guard said, his expression unreadable. "You are to come with me. Immediately." Andrews's blood ran cold. Had the custodian somehow orchestrated his arrest? "On whose authority?" he demanded. "On the authority of the Prince of Wales," the guard replied. "Prince Henry has heard of his father's illness and has returned to court. He wishes to speak with you. Privately. He said it is a matter of the utmost urgency concerning the project." Prince Henry, the heir to the throne, a young man known for his fierce intelligence, his Protestant zeal, and his impatience with the old ways of his father's court. What could he possibly want? With no choice, Andrews followed the guard through a series of private corridors to a small, austere chamber far from the opulence of the main palace. Prince Henry stood by a window, looking out at the gathering dawn, his posture rigid with tension. He turned as Andrews entered, and his face was not that of a grieving son, but of a furious, determined sovereign in waiting. "Dr. Andrews," the prince said, dispensing with any pleasantries. My father lies poisoned by agents of Rome and their hidden allies. This attack on the king is an attack on England itself. It is an attack on the great Bible he commanded you to create. I will not let it stand. He stepped closer, his eyes blazing. My father's methods are scholarly. Mine will be martial. I am placing the full resources of the Privy Council's intelligence network at your disposal. Code breakers, spies, interrogators. You will have whatever you need. But in return, you will tell me everything. You will not hide behind Archbishop Bancroft's robes or my father's scholarly obsessions. You will tell me who these custodians are, where they hide, and how we can root them out and burn them from the shadows. Start talking. Andrews was stunned. The game had changed again, dramatically. The scholarly pursuit was now a royal crusade with the full force of the state behind it. Prince Henry was offering him an army of shadows to fight the custodians with their own weapons. But as he looked into the prince's fierce, uncompromising eyes, he felt a new fear. Henry was a zealot. He would not be interested in nuanced truths about primordial forces or the dangers of certain words. He would see heresy and treason, and his solution would be the rack, the stake, and the sword. Using his resources meant unleashing a brutal, uninformed violence that could destroy the very truth they were trying to protect and almost certainly get Eleanor killed in the crossfire. He was standing before a prince offering him ultimate power to defeat his enemies, but accepting it felt like making a pact with a different kind of devil. He had to choose: continue Bancroft's careful, secretive war, or unleash Prince Henry's holy fire. And as he opened his mouth to speak, he knew that whatever he said next would determine not the weight of the prince's demand hung in the austere chamber like executioner's axe, the offer of the state's brutal, uncompromising power, a terrifying temptation that promised swift victory but at a cost Lancelot Andrews knew could be the utter annihilation of any hope of finding his daughter alive or preserving the fragile, terrifying truth buried within the scriptures, for Prince Henry's world was one of absolutes. Right and wrong, Protestant and Catholic, loyalty and treason, a world that had no room for the shades of gray, the ancient ambiguities, and the cosmological dangers that the custodians, in their twisted way, were trying to manage, and to hand him this conflict would be to unleash a blind, righteous fury that would burn through the delicate web of clues and secrets, leaving only ash and corpses in its wake, including, almost certainly, Eleanor's. Andrews met the prince's blazing gaze, his own mind racing, calculating a path through this new political minefield, understanding that outright refusal would mark him as suspicious, a man with something to hide, and might see him stripped of all authority and thrown into a dungeon himself, while full confession would ignite the very firestorm he feared. He chose a third path, the truth, but not the whole truth, a carefully curated version designed to enlist the prince's help while keeping the most dangerous knowledge contained. Your Highness, Andrews began, his voice low and respectful but firm, laced with a gravity that gave the prince pause. The enemy is indeed real. They call themselves the Custodians of the Veil. They are a secret order that has infiltrated the highest levels of churches across Europe, including our own. They believe that certain truths within the Bible are too dangerous for common men to know, truths that could, in their view, shatter faith and unravel the very order of Christendom. He saw the prince's eyes narrow at the mention of a hidden truth, a concept he inherently distrusted. Their methods are poison and assassination. Andrews continued, steering the narrative towards the tangible. They attempted to kill me. They murdered a nun within Westminster who was their agent. They have abducted my young daughter to silence me. He let the raw pain of that statement hang in the air, a father's grief that even a prince could understand. And yes, they have now attacked the king himself through the French ambassador's poisoned wine. They fear the King James translation because its commitment to original sources threatens to expose the alterations and suppressions they have made over centuries. They are not just heretics, Your Highness, they are traitors. They operate a shadow government within God's church, and they answer to no crown. This framing, focusing on their treason, their infiltration, their attack on the monarchy, was exactly what Prince Henry could comprehend and act upon. His face hardened into a mask of cold fury. Their names? He demanded. Give me names. That is the heart of the problem, Your Highness, Andrews said, spreading his hands in a gesture of frustration. They have no names. They are ghosts. They communicate through symbols and intermediaries. The French ambassador is likely an unwitting pawn, his wine cask tampered with by a servant who has since vanished. The nun who was killed was one of theirs, but she was a low-level operative. We need to find their center, their leadership here in England. And I believe the key to that lies not in chasing shadows, but in continuing the very work they are trying to stop. This was the risky part. He had to bring it back to the translation without revealing the apocalyptic reasons behind it. The king, in his wisdom, before this vile attack, identified a specific textual anomaly that he believed could lead us to them. A clue hidden in the scriptures themselves. He gave me a task, a final command to pursue this clue. With your permission, and with the discreet support of your resources, I can continue that work. To hunt them in the open would cause them to scatter deeper into the shadows. But if we let them believe they have succeeded in stopping us, that the king's illness has halted the project, they will grow confident. They will make a mistake. And when they do, your network can strike with precision, not blindly. It was a masterful manipulation, blending enough truth to be credible with a strategic omission of the cosmic stakes, appealing to Henry's desire for decisive action while channeling it towards Andrews's own scholarly methods. The prince was silent for a long moment, pacing before the window, his mind weighing the options. He wanted a war, but he also respected his father's intellectual legacy. Finally, he stopped and nodded sharply. "Very well, Doctor. You will have your discretion. I will assign you one man from my intelligence corps. His name is Gabriel. He is my best. He will act as your liaison, your protector, and your sword if needed. You will report your findings to him, and he will report to me. You will have whatever documents, whatever access you require. But understand this." The prince's voice turned to ice. "If I suspect for a moment that you are using my father's illness and my resources for your own ends, or if you withhold information that leads to further harm against the crown, the mercy I show you will be far less than that which you request for your enemies. Now go. Gabriel awaits you outside." Dismissed, Andrews bowed and left the chamber, his heart pounding. He had bought time and gained a powerful, dangerous ally. Outside the door, a man leaned against the wall, arms crossed. He was not tall, but he was built with a compact, coiled strength. He had a lean, sharp-featured face that gave away nothing, and eyes that were the flat, cool gray of a river stone. This was Gabriel. He pushed off the wall and fell into step beside Andrews without a word. They walked in silence through the corridors of Whitehall until they were outside in the crisp morning air. "Where to, Doctor?" Gabriel's voice was as neutral as his expression. "Cambridge," Andrews said, the decision firm. "We need to speak with Dr. William Ford immediately. The king's illness revealed a clue. The gate is in the genealogy. Ford was working on the genealogy of Christ. He found an anomaly. It may be connected." Gabriel simply nodded. "Horses are ready. We ride within the hour." The journey to Cambridge was a silent, grim affair. Gabriel was a man of few words, his presence both a comfort and a constant, chilling reminder of the prince's watching eyes. Andrews's mind was a whirlwind, juggling the king's cryptic words, the need to find Ford, the ever-present agony of Eleanor's absence, and the new, complicating factor of the prince's agent. When they arrived at Cambridge, however, they were met not with answers, but with a new layer of mystery. Dr. Ford's chambers were in disarray, but not from a struggle. It looked as if he had left in a tremendous hurry, or as if someone had conducted a frantic, rapid search. His notes on the genealogy were gone. The ancient Greek manuscript he had spoken of, the one with the peculiar pre-Nicene script, was missing from the university library's secure vault. The librarian, a nervous little man, stated that Dr. Ford had withdrawn it 2 days prior for urgent comparative analysis, and had not returned it. Ford himself was nowhere to be found. He had not been seen for over a day. His colleagues assumed he had been called to London for consultation on the king's illness. But Andrews knew better. A cold dread began to creep up his spine. Had the custodians gotten to Ford? Had he been silenced like Sister Beatrice? Or had Ford, brilliant, arrogant Ford, discovered something so significant that he had gone into hiding? Gabriel moved through the rooms with a predatory efficiency, his eyes missing nothing. He picked up a quill from the floor, examined the ink stain on the desk, and then knelt, retrieving a small, overlooked fragment of parchment that had fallen behind a waste basket. He handed it to Andrews without a word. On it, in Ford's distinctive, hurried script, was a single line, a note perhaps meant for himself, asterisk. The name is not in the list. The name is the list. The gate is not a word, it is a key made of names. Matthew 1 verse 13, Zara means seed but the root is ziare, to scatter, to sow, or to unleash. Asterisk below that, as if an afterthought, were two words heavily underlined. The descent. Andrews stared at the fragment, his scholar's mind igniting. Ford hadn't been taken. He had fled. He had made a breakthrough so profound it had terrified him, and he had run, taking the evidence with him. He was trying to solve the puzzle himself, to understand the gate, before the custodians found him. And he had left one last breadcrumb for anyone clever enough to find it. Matthew 1 verse 13. Zara. A name in the genealogy of Christ. A name that meant seed but whose root implied scattering, sowing, or unleashing. And the final, chilling term, the descent. It wasn't a gate one entered, it was a descent one made. A journey downwards. Into what? Hell? History? The primordial past? Gabriel watched him, his gray eyes missing the internal storm but reading the external shock. What does it mean, Doctor? Andrews looked up from the fragment, the pieces of the king's madness, Ford's flight, and the custodian's fear finally coalescing into a terrifying, coherent whole. It means, Andrews said, his voice barely a whisper, that Dr. Ford has not just found a hidden word. He has found a hidden door. And he is trying to discover how to open it before our enemies do. We are not just translating a Bible, Gabriel. We are assembling a key. And my colleague is trying to discover what that key unlocks, and whether it should ever be turned. He looked at the prince's agent, a man of action and violence, and posed a question that belonged in the realm of theology and nightmare. The question is, do we help him find the lock, or do we do everything in our power to break the key before it is fully forged? Gabriel's expression did not change, but his hand rested casually on the hilt of his dagger. My orders are to assist you in hunting the traitors, Doctor. Not to ponder theology. If this Ford has answers, we find him. Everything else is noise. And in that moment, Andrews understood the true nature of his new alliance. He had a bloodhound on a leash, and the beast only cared for the scent of the prey, not for the cosmic consequences of the hunt. They had to find Ford, and they had to find him before the custodians did, because whether Ford was trying to unlock the gate or seal it forever, he was now the most wanted man in England, holding the most dangerous secret in Christendom. The scent of the prey, a metaphorical trail left by a terrified scholar on a fragment of parchment, now became a physical, desperate chase through the rain-slicked streets of Cambridge for Gabriel. The prince's agent was indeed a bloodhound, and his methods were as efficient as they were brutal, his flat gray eyes seeing not a city of learning but a landscape of hiding places and vulnerabilities, and he did not bother with university officials or timid librarians. Instead, he went straight to the world that existed in the shadows of the scholarly one, the stable hands who saw everyone who came and went, the tavern keepers who heard loose talk after too much ale, the street urchins who were invisible to gentlemen but saw everything. With a combination of whispered threats and the flash of silver coins, the truth began to emerge. Dr. William Ford had not vanished into thin air. He had been seen, late in the night 2 days prior, leaving his chambers not in a panic, but with a purposeful, swift energy, a heavy satchel clutched to his chest, his face pale but determined under his hood. He had gone not to the London road, but towards the river, where a certain boatman, known for his discretion and his high prices, operated a ferry service at all hours. Gabriel found this boatman at a damp wharfside inn, and within minutes, without raising his voice or even drawing his dagger, he had the information. Yes, he had taken the nervous gentleman downriver, not far, just to the little village of Grantchester, and the gentleman had been specific. He wanted to be taken to the old Roman road that ran behind the church, a lonely, deserted stretch even in daylight. This was all Gabriel needed. With a curt nod to Andrews, he led the way out of Cambridge, moving with a ground-eating pace that forced the older scholar to near jog to keep up, the agent's mind already mapping the terrain, calculating Ford's possible destinations along that ancient road. The rain began to fall in earnest, a cold, persistent drizzle that soaked through their cloaks and turned the path to mud, but Gabriel seemed not to notice, his focus absolute. The old Roman road was indeed lonely, a raised causeway cutting through waterlogged fields and patches of dense woodland, a place of ghosts and forgotten history. They had been walking for perhaps an hour, the silence between them broken only by the squelch of their boots and the patter of rain on leaves, when Gabriel suddenly stopped, holding up a hand. He pointed to the mud ahead. A set of footprints, fresh, made by a boot with a distinctive cracked heel, led off the main road and into a copse of ancient, gnarled oaks. He went this way, Gabriel stated, his voice low. And recently. They followed the trail into the gloom of the woods, the branches weaving a canopy that turned the afternoon into twilight. The trail led to the ruins of a small Roman temple, little more than a few courses of moss-covered stone and a sunken floor now filled with leaf litter and murky water. It was a place of utter desolation. And there, huddled in a niche where a statue of a forgotten god might once have stood, they found him. Dr. William Ford was a wreck of the arrogant man Andrews had known. He was soaked, shivering, his clothes torn by brambles, his eyes wild with a combination of terror and a feverish, intellectual excitement. In his arms, he clutched his satchel as if it were his own child. When he saw Andrews, he gasped, a sob of relief and fear escaping his lips. "Lancelot. Thank God. I knew you would understand. I knew you would follow the clues." His eyes then flicked to Gabriel, and the fear returned tenfold. "Who is he?" "A friend," Andrews said quickly, kneeling beside him. "William, what in God's name is happening? Why did you run? What have you discovered?" Ford's story tumbled out in a frantic, rain-chilled whisper. After his near-drowning in the Thames and the shared revelation with Andrews, he had become obsessed, returning to Cambridge with a new, terrifying lens through which to examine his work on the genealogy. The king's mention of a gate had consumed him. He had re-examined the ancient manuscript, the one with the pre-Nicene anomaly. "It's not just one name, Lancelot," Ford whispered, his eyes wide. "It's a pattern. A code woven through the entire genealogy in Matthew. A list of names that, when read not for their meaning but for their numerical value in the ancient systems of gematria, and when combined with the specific, alternate spellings found in the oldest texts, forms a key. A mathematical key. The Zara clue was just the beginning. The root ZRA, its value is 307. But in the context of the pattern, it acts as a cipher, shifting the values of the names that follow it." He was talking too fast, his hands trembling as he pulled a sheaf of notes from his satchel, pages filled with complex calculations, Greek and Hebrew letters, and numbers. "The gate isn't a physical thing. It's a state of understanding. A frequency of meaning. The genealogy isn't just a list of ancestors. It's a hidden treatise on the nature of the divine and the other, the thing they called Astaroth. It describes the moment of creation not as a victory, but as a binding. A quarantine. The names, when decoded, describe the fetters used to chain the primordial chaos, to impose the laws of physics and time upon it. The descent I wrote of, it's the process of unbinding. Of reversing creation." He looked up, his face a mask of apocalyptic awe. "The King James translation, our quest for the most original, accurate sources. We are, without knowing it, reassembling the original, powerful formula of those names. We are recreating the key. And the custodians know it. They haven't been trying to stop us to protect faith. They've been trying to stop us to protect reality itself. They believe that if the genealogy is translated with perfect accuracy, using the oldest sources, it will cease to be a historical record and will become an incantation. A trigger. It will loosen the fetters." Andrews felt the world tilt around him. The stakes were even more monstrous than he had imagined. This was no longer about a single verse. It was about the entire architectural framework of the scripture. The Bible was not just a holy book, it was the user manual for a cosmic containment system. Gabriel, who had been listening with an expression of utter impatience, finally spoke. "This is madness. Numbers and spells. Where are the men who did this? Where is their leader? Ford looked at him as if he were a simple child. Don't you understand? It doesn't matter who their leader is. What matters is the text. We have to make a choice. Do we complete the work and risk unleashing what was bound? Or do we deliberately mistranslate? Do we continue the lie and forever live in a world built on a foundation of managed ignorance? It was the same impossible choice Andrews had faced, but now magnified to a cosmic scale. Before anyone could answer, Gabriel's head snapped up. His hunter's senses, dulled by the academic talk, had caught a sound the scholars had missed. The faint crunch of a footstep on wet leaves. Someone else was in the woods. In an instant, Gabriel's dagger was in his hand, and he melted into the shadows of the ruined temple wall, becoming just another stone. Andrews and Ford froze, holding their breath. The footsteps came closer, cautious, measured. Then a figure emerged from between the trees. It was not a custodian assassin. It was an old man, stooped and weathered, leaning on a gnarled staff, dressed in the simple clothes of a shepherd. He looked at the two bedraggled scholars huddled in the ruins with an expression of mild curiosity. "Lost, are ye, gentlemen?" the old man asked, his voice raspy with age. "This is a damp place to be pondering the scriptures." Relief flooded through Andrews. Just a local shepherd. But then the old man's eyes fell on the papers in Ford's hands, on the complex calculations. His mild curiosity vanished, replaced by a look of deep, ancient knowing. He took a step closer, and his voice changed, losing its rustic rasp, becoming clear, educated, and chillingly calm. "The Gematria of Zara. The 307 cipher. You have come further than we anticipated, Dr. Ford. We have watchers everywhere. Even old shepherds who know the value of silence and the old ways." He was a custodian. A different kind, a scholar guardian, one who understood the very thing he was protecting. He made no move to attack. He simply stood there. "You have a choice now, doctors. A real choice. Not one born of fear or ignorance, but of understanding. You now glimpse the truth. The work you are doing is not heresy. It is archaeology at the end of time. You are digging up a weapon that could unmake all of this." He gestured to the woods, the sky, the world. "The veil exists for a reason. Will you be the ones to tear it down?" He looked directly at Andrews. "Your daughter is safe. She is valued. She can be returned to you unharmed. All of this can end. All you need to do is make the choice we have always made. Choose order. Choose the managed truth. Choose the veil." He was offering a peace. A return to normalcy. Eleanor for the translation. It was the same offer, but now made from a position of terrifying knowledge, not just threat. Andrews looked at Ford, who was staring at the old man with a mixture of hatred and fascination. He looked at Gabriel, a hidden knife in the shadows. He thought of the king, raving in his bed. He thought of the cosmic prison described in Ford's calculations. And he thought of his daughter's face. The old custodian watched him, waiting for his answer, offering a way out of the nightmare. But as Andrews opened his mouth to speak, a flicker of movement caught his eye. High up in the branches of the tallest oak tree overlooking the ruins, far higher than any shepherd would look, was a sudden, brief flash of light, a reflection off a piece of glass or metal. Someone else was watching. The custodian's offer was not the endgame. It was just another move on the board. And another player had just entered the field. The flash of light high in the oak tree was a silent, gleaming apostrophe in the tense standoff between scholarly despair and cosmic blackmail, a signal not meant for them but for someone else, a stark reminder that the game was far larger and more complex than the offer of a single, seemingly omniscient old man implied, and in that split second, Lancelot Andrews's mind, honed by weeks of terror and intellectual turmoil, understood that the old custodian shepherd was not the master of this situation. He was a piece, perhaps a significant one, but still a piece on a board being watched by other, hidden players, and that the offer of his daughter's return in exchange for complicit silence was not a resolution but a trap designed to neuter the one man who was beginning to understand the true nature of the weapon they were forging. A trap that would ensure the managed ignorance continued forever under the custodian's control. The old man, following Andrews's gaze upward, saw nothing. The flash was gone, but the subtle shift in Andrews's expression, The hardening of his resolve told him his offer had been rejected. A flicker of disappointment, then resignation, passed over the old man's weathered features. A pity, he murmured, not with anger, but with a sorrow that felt infinitely more dangerous. The path of knowledge is often the path of greatest sorrow. Remember, you chose this. He made no aggressive move. He simply turned and began to walk slowly back into the woods, his form quickly swallowed by the mist and the rain-drenched trees, leaving behind not a threat, but a chilling prophecy. The moment he disappeared, Gabriel emerged from the shadows, his dagger still drawn, his gray eyes scanning the tree line. There was a watcher, he stated flatly. In the oak. Gone now. I saw, Andrews said, his voice tight. The encounter had changed everything. The custodians were not a monolithic enemy. They had factions, internal conflicts. The old shepherd represented one faction, the purists, the guardians who believed in their mission of protection and were willing to negotiate, to offer deals. The watcher in the tree represented another, a more radical, aggressive element that believed in absolute eradication of the threat, which included them. This schism was both a vulnerability and a new, terrifying variable. Ford, who had been paralyzed with fear during the exchange, now scrambled to his feet, clutching his satchel of notes. Did you hear him, Lancelot? He confirmed it. He confirmed everything. The genealogy is a key. A mathematical incantation. We are not translators. We are locksmiths at the door of creation. His terror was now subsumed by a frantic, obsessive excitement. We have to continue. We have to complete the work. We have to know what it truly says. And unleash hell upon the earth? Andrews snapped, the weight of the decision crushing him. Is your curiosity worth the apocalypse, William? It is not curiosity. Ford shot back, his eyes blazing. It is the pursuit of the truth of God. If God allowed this knowledge to be encoded in His holy word, then it is meant to be found. Who are we to say otherwise? Who are the custodians to play God and hide it? This is the greatest discovery in the history of Christendom. We cannot turn away from it. It was the eternal cry of the scientist versus the priest, the seeker of knowledge versus the guardian of souls. Andrews was both, and he was being torn in two. Gabriel cared for none of it. Theological debate is a luxury for safe rooms, he said, his voice cutting through the rain. We are exposed. The watcher will have reported our location. More will come. We need to move. Now. He was right. The ruined temple was now a target. They had to get Ford and his devastating notes to safety. But where? Cambridge was compromised. London was a nest of custodians. Lambeth, Andrews said decisively. The Archbishop's palace. It is the most fortified place we have access to. Bancroft must hear this. He must be made to understand what we are dealing with. Gabriel nodded, and they set off at a brutal pace back towards Cambridge to secure horses, the rain now a steady downpour that mirrored the deluge of terrifying revelations soaking Andrews's mind. The journey to London was a nightmare of heightened alertness, with Gabriel constantly scanning the road, expecting an ambush at every turn, but none came. The custodians, it seemed, were regrouping, or perhaps the conflict between their factions was causing paralysis. When they finally arrived at Lambeth Palace, mud-spattered and exhausted, they were ushered immediately into Bancroft's private study. The Archbishop listened in stunned, grim silence as Ford, with frantic energy, laid out his calculations, explaining the coded pattern in the genealogy of Matthew, the gematria, the concept of the fetters, and the descent. The terrifying implication that the Bible was a cosmic containment document. Bancroft, a man of immense learning and deep faith, paled as he understood the implications. He looked from Ford's feverish face to Andrews's agonized one. This is beyond heresy, he whispered. This is a challenge to the very nature of divine will. If what you say is true, the decisions we make here, they resonate in a realm far beyond theology. We have to stop, Andrews said, the image of the old custodian's sorrowful face haunting him. We have to deliberately mistranslate. We have to bury this. It is too dangerous. No, Ford insisted. We must see it through. We have a duty to the truth. Bancroft held up a hand, silencing them. His face was a mask of profound conflict. This is not a decision for scholars alone. This touches upon the safety of the realm, of all Christendom. The king is incapacitated. The Prince Henry would see this only as heresy to be purged. He would burn the notes, and likely burn us with them. He paced the room, his robes swishing. There is only one authority on earth that has the experience, the resources, and the discretion to handle a matter of this delicate and dangerous a nature. He stopped and looked at them. The Vatican. Andrews and Ford stared at him, dumbfounded. The Vatican? Andrews exclaimed. Your Grace, the custodians likely have their roots there. You would hand them this weapon? Not them, Bancroft said sharply. There are factions in Rome, just as there are here. The Pope himself may be unaware of the full extent of this custodian cancer within his own church. I propose we send an envoy, a secret envoy, with a copy of Dr. Ford's findings. We appeal to the highest authority in the Catholic world. We ask for guidance, for a council. This is too big for England alone. This is a matter for ecumenical council, convened in absolute secrecy. It was a breathtakingly audacious plan. To reach out to their bitterest religious enemy for help in understanding the true nature of the scripture they both shared. It was either an act of supreme statesmanship or utter madness. Who would we send? Ford asked, intrigued by the scholarly possibility. It would have to be someone of impeccable credentials, deep theological knowledge, and utter discretion. Someone who could navigate the treacherous waters of the Roman Curia. Bancroft's eyes settled on Andrews. It would have to be you, Lancelot. Andrews felt the world drop. They will not harm her if they know you are going to Rome to potentially advocate for their point of view, to argue for the suppression of this knowledge. It is the only reason they might let you go. You will be their unwitting agent and our intentional envoy simultaneously. It is the only way. The complexity of the plan was dizzying. He would play the defeated scholar, broken by the king's illness and the custodian's threats, going to Rome to seek guidance from the older, wiser church, to convince them to help stop the dangerous translation. In reality, he would be showing them Ford's work, forcing a global, secret decision on the fate of the Bible itself. Gabriel cannot accompany you, Bancroft continued. His presence would be seen as a military threat. You will go alone. As a pilgrim. We will arrange safe passage through channels I have dormant connections to. Gabriel looked deeply unhappy but nodded. His orders were to serve the crown's interests, and if this was the archbishop's strategy, he would comply. Andrews was trapped. It was a chance to potentially save his daughter by playing along, and a chance to resolve the cosmic crisis at its source. But it meant abandoning the active search for her, placing his faith in a Machiavellian plan and the fractured politics of the Roman Church. With a heart heavier than lead, he agreed. The next days were a blur of clandestine preparation. A trusted scribe made a precise copy of Ford's notes. Bancroft composed encrypted letters to his contacts in Rome. Andrews prepared for his journey, his mind a turmoil of fear and a faint, desperate hope. He was to leave from a secluded cove in Kent, on a ship supposedly carrying wool to Flanders, then overland to Italy. On the night before his departure, as he sat in his chamber at Lambeth staring at his daughter's ribbon, a soft tap came at his door. It was Gabriel. The agent entered and handed him a small, narrow object wrapped in leather. A parting gift, Doctor, Gabriel said, his voice neutral. It is a stiletto. Italian made. Very thin. Easily concealed in a boot or sleeve. Its purpose is not for fighting. It is for one thing only. He fixed Andrews with his flat gray eyes. If you are captured, and if you are certain that capture will lead to you being broken and made to reveal what you know, use it on yourself. A quick thrust upwards, under the chin, into the brain. It is a cleaner end than anything the custodians will offer. Do not hesitate. Andrews took the cold, lethal object, feeling its weight of finality. It was not a weapon of defense, it was a tool for suicide. Gabriel's gift was a stark acknowledgement of the true danger he was walking into. The agent left as silently as he came. The next morning, Andrews, disguised as a minor cleric, began his journey south. The ride to Kent was uneventful, the countryside peaceful and oblivious to the cosmic war being waged over its soul. He reached the cove as the sun began to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. A small, weather-beaten cog was anchored offshore, a smaller boat waiting on the beach to take him out. This was it. He was leaving England, his mission impossible. As he walked towards the boat, two figures emerged from the dunes. His heart leapt into his throat. Custodians! But as they drew closer, he saw it was Gabriel and, to his utter astonishment, Dr. William Ford. "What is this?" Andrews asked. "A change of plan," Gabriel said tersely. "The prince intercepted the archbishop's communications. He forbids any contact with Rome. He considers it treason. He has ordered Ford's notes seized and the translation to continue under his direct supervision, with all heretical deviations removed. The archbishop is under house arrest within Lambeth." Andrews stared, horrified. Prince Henry's zealous axe had fallen, shattering their careful plan. "Then, why are you here?" Ford stepped forward, his face alight with a new, desperate energy. "Because Gabriel here is not as single-minded as he appears. He understands that the prince's way leads to butchery and ignorance. He helped me escape Lambeth with the notes. We are not going to Rome, Lancelot. We are going into hiding. We are going to finish the work ourselves. We are going to complete the translation of the genealogy as it was meant to be, to see the key fully forged, to understand what it truly is before anyone, custodian, prince, or pope, can stop us." He gestured to the boat. "And you are coming with us. We need you. Your daughter's life depends on us understanding the full power we wield. It is the only bargaining chip we will have that is big enough to get her back." Gabriel nodded, his expression grim. "The prince's men are searching for us. We have perhaps hours before this coast is swarming with soldiers. We must go. Now." Andrews stood on the beach, the cold channel wind whipping at his robes. Before him was the path to Rome, to diplomacy, to a potential peaceful resolution. Behind him was England, his imprisoned king, his captive daughter. And now, beside him, was the path of ultimate rebellion, two fugitive scholars and a prince's rogue agent, aiming to unlock the greatest secret in history against the orders of every power on earth. He looked at the boat, then back towards England. Every choice was a damnation. Every path led into shadow. Taking a deep breath of the salt air, he made his decision. He turned his back on the boat and faced his companions. "Then we don't need a pilgrim's passage," he said, his voice firm with a new, terrifying resolve. "We need a fortress. A place to work where no one will ever find us." Gabriel allowed a thin, cold smile. "I know just the place." The plan was gone. Now, there was only the truth, whatever it cost.